The dog came from nowhere. One moment the street corner at Millbank Avenue and 5th was just another ugly Tuesday afternoon scene. Three young men circling a limping woman like slow, lazy sharks, a small crowd of bystanders doing what bystanders do best, which is nothing. And then there was 80 pounds of Belgian Malinois moving at a dead sprint through 2 lanes of traffic, clearing the hood of a yellow cab without breaking stride. And the whole tableau froze like someone had hit pause on the world. The dog stopped precisely 6 inches from the woman's left knee. It sat, not the frantic, panting sit of a lost pet reunited with its owner at an airport, not the confused, circling sit of an animal that had run itself breathless. This was a military sit, spine straight, head up, eyes forward, weight centered. A soldier presenting himself for duty. The woman looked down at the dog. The dog looked up at the woman. In the 7 seconds of absolute silence that followed, Sarah Novak, freelance journalist, 31 years old, 7 years of covering wars and city council meetings, and everything mundane in between, felt something she hadn't felt since she watched a bomb disposal expert cut the red wire and nothing happened. She felt like she had been completely, fundamentally wrong about what she was looking at. She had been sitting on the same bench for 40 minutes before anyone noticed her. That was the point, of course, though nobody would understand that until much later. The bench was at the south end of Riverside Commons, a pocket park wedge between a dry cleaner and a Vietnamese sandwich shop on Millbank Avenue, in the kind of neighborhood that urban planners call transitional and residents call getting worse before it gets better. The park had 3 benches, 2 broken trash cans, 1 struggling oak tree, and a persistent smell of fried shallots from the sandwich shop that Sarah had always found oddly comforting. Sarah was there because the dry cleaner next door was supposedly the front for a low-level numbers operation, and her editor wanted 500 words by Thursday. She had her coffee, her notebook, and a direct sight line to the cleaner's back door, and she had settled in for the long, boring work of watching nothing happen. She noticed the woman on the middle bench because of the book. Most people who settled on that bench for any length of time were either checking their phones or sleeping. This woman was doing neither. She was reading, with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere to be and no desire to be anywhere else. Her clothes were the first thing that registered. A gray surplus army jacket, worn at both elbows, dark jeans that had been washed so many times they'd faded to the color of fog, and a pair of boots that had seen serious mileage. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low, practical knot. She had a canvas backpack at her feet, stuffed full, with a broken zipper that had been repaired with a carabiner clip. The limp was noticeable when she'd arrived. Sarah had watched her walk from the direction of the bus stop, and there was a subtle but consistent hitch in her left stride, the kind of compensation pattern that spoke of an old injury that had healed imperfectly and been lived with long enough to become part of the body's grammar. Mid to late 20s, Sarah estimated. Maybe 28. Hard to tell. The book cover faced away, so Sarah couldn't read the title. Only later, when she thought back over every detail of that afternoon, would she remember the brief moment when the woman had shifted position and the spine of the book had been visible for a fraction of a second. The Art of War. Sun Tzu. Translated by Lionel Giles. At the time, Sarah noted it and moved on. Inside the woman's backpack, invisible to the world, were 3 things worth noting. A military-grade individual first aid kit, a spiral notebook filled with neat, precise math workings in red pen, and a handwritten letter addressed to a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Tully, explaining the Pythagorean theorem in 3 different ways until at least one of them made sense. Maya Chen had been tutoring Marcus every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for 4 months. He was failing 8th grade math not because he was stupid. He was, in fact, ferociously smart, but because he had missed 53 days of school the previous year, and nobody had thought to help him catch up. Nobody except Maya, who had sat next to him on this exact bench one evening while he was trying to work through a problem on his phone's calculator and had asked, with no particular agenda, if he wanted a hand. She was not homeless. She was not a vagrant. She was not a problem. She was a 28-year-old woman waiting for a 12-year-old kid to show up for his Tuesday math session, reading Sun Tzu in the late afternoon light, wearing clothes she wore because they were comfortable and durable, and she had never much cared about signaling her status through fabric. She had 3 purple heart medals locked in a shoebox under the bed of her studio apartment, 2 blocks away. She had never told anyone her address. She had learned, at significant personal cost, that the safest way to be left alone to do the work you actually care about is to look like someone no one would bother paying attention to. That strategy, on this particular Tuesday, was about to catastrophically fail. Danny Kowalski had a theory about the world that he'd developed through 24 years of careful, if somewhat limited, observation. Most people were too scared to take what they wanted, and the ones who looked scared were the easiest marks. He had 2 criminal citations, one for aggravated harassment, one for petty theft, that were, in his mind, proof of nothing except that the system was rigged against guys like him. He had 2 friends, Marcus Webb and Tyler Briggs, who laughed at his jokes and followed his lead, and had never once in their collective experience said the word no. The 3 of them had been working this block since noon, in the loose, unhurried way of people who have no jobs and no particular places to be. They'd already rattled a kid on a bicycle, shouted at 2 women coming out of the sandwich shop, and gotten a $20 bill from an older man they'd followed half a block down the street, while making increasingly specific comments about how nice his watch looked. Now Danny's attention had settled on the woman on the bench. "Look at this," he said, not quietly. Marcus looked. Tyler looked. Tyler looked away faster than Marcus did, which was a thing Danny noted and filed away as cowardice. "She looks like she's got stuff," Danny said. This was his standard evaluation. Not who is this person, but does this person have stuff? Sarah, 3 benches away, heard this. She looked up from her notebook. She looked at the 3 young men, and then at the woman, and felt the familiar, nauseating calculus of, how bad is this going to get, and at what point is it my problem? She'd learned the wrong lesson from a decade of watching other people's problems, which was that problems have levels, and you wait until they reach your level before you act. She was not proud of this. She was, in this specific moment, in the process of doing it again. The approach was standard. Danny led, the other 2 fanned out. It was done with the automatic ease of people who had done variations of this many times and never faced any real consequences. "Hey," Danny said, stopping in front of Maya's bench. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Maya looked up from her book. Her eyes were dark brown and completely still, the way the surface of water is still before you understand how deep it goes. She looked at Danny with the focused, calibrating attention of someone doing a rapid assessment, and then she looked back at her book. In 11 years of doing exactly what he was doing, no one had ever just looked back at their book. Danny felt something flicker in his chest that he would have called anger and a therapist would have called embarrassment. "Rude," he said. "I said hey." "I heard you," Maya said. She did not look up. "So answer me. What would you like me to say?" The flatness of her voice threw him off for a second. Not scared, not aggressive, just flat, like she was working through a mildly tedious administrative task. "I want you to get up," Danny said. "This is our bench." Maya turned a page. "It's a city bench. It belongs to the city. You're welcome to sit on one of the other 2. The crowd had started to gather in that specific way that modern sidewalk crowds gather, which is to say that people slowed down without stopping, pulled out phones, and created the shape of an audience without any of the responsibility. Sarah had stood up. She was filming. She was aware that she was filming instead of doing anything else, and she was doing the familiar internal negotiation with herself about it. Danny reached down and knocked the book out of Maya's hand. Maya watched the book hit the pavement. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Danny, and it was the first time she had held his gaze directly, and he felt. Danny felt, though he could not have articulated it and would never have admitted it, something that his body registered as a warning and his brain immediately overrode. He was bigger than her. He had 2 friends. She had a limp. None of those things were relevant to what his nervous system was trying to tell him, but his nervous system had never won an argument with his ego. "There you go," Danny said. "Pick it up." Maya said nothing. Marcus laughed. Tyler laughed 3 beats after Marcus. Danny took this as encouragement. "Pick it up," Danny repeated, and reached for her backpack. Sarah had crossed the distance to the street and was waving at the police cruiser before she'd consciously decided to do it. Officer Pete Dawson had been on this beat for 6 years. He was not a bad person, in the way that many people are not bad people. He was attentive to the things he'd been trained to be attentive to, and less attentive to the things that training had quietly taught him to deprioritize. He saw the small crowd. He saw 3 young men at a bench. He saw a woman. He processed this as probably another situation with one of the regulars. The regulars was not a category he would have defended if pressed, but it was a category that existed in his working mind, a taxonomy built from 6 years of daily exposure to a neighborhood in flux. The people who occupied certain benches on certain blocks had, over time, been sorted by his pattern recognition into residents and others, and the woman's clothing had done most of the sorting before he'd pulled the cruiser to the curb. "What's going on?" he said, not to Maya, but to the general vicinity of Danny, which was a choice that communicated more than he intended. "Officer," Sarah said quickly, "these 3 men have been harassing her for the last 5 minutes. They knocked her book out of her hand. They tried to take her bag." "Hey, we weren't doing anything," Danny said immediately. "We were just talking to her. She got weird about it." Dawson looked at Danny. He looked at Maya. He looked back at Danny. He said, to Maya, "You got any ID on you?" The crowd was silent. Maya looked up at Officer Dawson. That same flat, measuring look. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket and produced a worn leather wallet, and from the wallet, a North Carolina state ID card, which she held out. Dawson took it. He looked at it. He looked at her. He typed something into his in-car computer. "You have a local address on this?" he said. "I do," Maya said. Current. He handed it back. He had not asked Danny for ID. He had not asked Marcus or Tyler for ID. "Okay," Dawson said, in the tone of a man wrapping up paperwork. "Sounds like maybe there was just a misunderstanding. You guys," this to Danny collegially, "move along, all right? And you," this to Maya, "you might want to find somewhere else to sit. This corner's been a little active lately." Sarah stared at him. Danny shot Maya a smirk, the smirk of a man who has just been handed a referee's decision, and turned away. Maya picked up her book from the pavement. She dusted off the cover. She sat back down. Dawson was walking back to his cruiser when Sarah grabbed his arm. "You just told her to move," Sarah said. "She wasn't doing anything." They knocked her book down and tried to grab her bag. "Ma'am, I'm not going to stand here and adjudicate. You didn't even ask their names." Dawson paused. He had the particular expression of a man who knows, on some small, quiet, uncrowded level, that a mistake has been made, but has too much invested in the decision to reverse it now. "I'll keep an eye on the situation," he said. He got in his cruiser and drove half a block before parking, which was either a demonstration of keeping an eye on the situation or a demonstration of parking at a safe distance from it. Sarah was not sure which. She walked back, toward Maya's bench. Danny and his crew had turned around. They were coming back. Maya was reading again. "You should go," Sarah said to her quietly. Maya looked up. "I'm waiting for someone," she said. "These guys aren't going to leave." "No," Maya agreed. She looked at Danny's approaching figure with the calm, precise attention of someone reading a clock. "They're not." "Then, 3 options," Maya said, not to Sarah, exactly, but not to Sarah. Her voice was so quiet that Sarah had to lean in. 1, I leave. That works for about 4 blocks, and then they follow, and we're in a less public location. 2, I engage, and this gets unpleasant for several people. 3, she stopped speaking. Her head turned. Something had changed in her face. Not alarm, not even close to alarm. Something more like recognition. The way your face changes when you hear your name called across a crowded room. Sarah turned to look at what she was looking at. Across 2 lanes of traffic, a Belgian Malinois was standing very still at the edge of the opposite sidewalk. It was looking directly at Maya. Dr. Kevin Park would describe it later, in approximately 40 different interviews over the following 3 weeks, as the only time in 4 years of working with ghosts that he had been genuinely surprised by the dog. "He's a very readable animal," Kevin would say, always with the same note of residual bewilderment. "That's what makes him good at therapy work. You always know where you are with Ghost. He communicates. He tells you what he needs. He's never impulsive." A pause. Until Tuesday. The session had been a standard one. A small group of veterans working through exposure exercises with Ghost and 2 other dogs in the center's courtyard. Ghost had been doing a controlled socialization drill, moving between participants on command, allowing himself to be petted, offering the slow, steady, deliberate contact that the VA's K9 program had found remarkably effective for veterans with hypervigilance symptoms. And then, in the middle of a sit-stay command, Ghost's head came up. Kevin saw it. He saw the nose, the way the nostrils flared and worked, not the quick, confused sampling of a dog catching an interesting scent, but the focused, confirming inhale of an animal processing something known and significant. He saw the ears rotate forward like satellite dishes locking onto a signal. Ghost, Kevin said. Standard reinforcement cue. Ghost did not respond to his name. This had never happened. The dog stood. He turned toward the courtyard gate with the slow, fluid deliberateness that Kevin recognized as the opposite of distraction. This was purpose. This was intent. Ghost, sit. The emergency command. The one that had never once failed in 4 years. Ghost walked to the gate, put his nose through the gap in the latch, and pushed it open. Kevin would later say that the 10 seconds in which he processed what he was seeing before he started running were the 10 most disorienting seconds of his professional life. A 7-year-old military working dog with 19 combat deployments and a perfect behavioral record did not just leave. It was simply not a thing that happened. But Ghost was already gone, crossing the first lane of Millbank Avenue with his head high and his gait utterly certain, like an arrow that had been released and had only one possible destination. Kevin was running 40 seconds behind him, which was exactly 40 seconds too late to stop what was about to happen, and exactly 40 seconds soon enough to see all of it. Ghost crossed the second lane of traffic. He did not slow down. He reached the curb at Riverside Commons, and his pace changed from a sprint to a walk, the automatic deceleration of a dog entering a known situation at appropriate speed. He moved through the thin crowd of bystanders like they weren't there, not aggressively, just around them, the way water moves around stones, because there was only one thing in his field of attention, and everything else was geography. He stopped 6 inches from Maya Chen's left knee. He sat. His spine was perfectly straight. His tail was still. His ears were forward. His eyes, amber brown and absolutely clear, were fixed on Maya's face. The silence lasted 7 seconds. Sarah counted them later, watching her own footage. During those 7 seconds, Danny Kowalski, who had been 3 feet from Maya and still closing, simply stopped. Not because he understood what he was watching. Because his body understood it before his mind did. In the ancient, vertebrate part of the brain that processes threat and dominance and the posture of things that have been made, through long and serious work, into weapons. During those 7 seconds, the bystanders who had been filming with a kind of detached entertainment suddenly weren't detached anymore. Something had shifted in the scene's register, and they could all feel it without being able to name it. During those 7 seconds, Maya looked down at Ghost. Her face did something complicated and private that happened too quickly for most cameras to catch, but that Sarah's camera, held at close range, recorded perfectly. A flicker of something. Not surprise, not emotion exactly, something older and deeper than that. The face of someone encountering a fact about the world that they had put away and not expected to encounter again. She said softly, "Ghost." The dog made a sound. Low, not a bark, not a whine. Something in between, something that Kevin Park, arriving at the edge of the crowd and pushing through with his clinic lanyard still around his neck, would later describe as the sound he made exactly once when we told him his previous handler wouldn't be coming back. I didn't know a dog could remember something long enough to be relieved about it. Ghost pressed his face against Maya's knee. Maya put her hand on his head, very gently, the way you touch something you thought was gone. Danny said, "Get that thing away from." Ghost's head came up. The growl was not loud. It didn't need to be. It had the specific, subsonic quality of a sound made by an animal that has been trained to mean exactly what it says, and what it said was a complete sentence with no ambiguity in any of its clauses. Danny's foot had been 6 inches off the ground. He put it back down. He took 3 steps backward without making a conscious decision to do so. Marcus and Tyler had already subtly repositioned themselves to a distance that could be described as not immediately involved. Kevin arrived at the bench, out of breath, with his clinic ID swinging. He looked at Ghost. He looked at the woman. He looked at Ghost again. Something in his face performed a rapid, visible recalculation. He started. Then, are you? He looked at Maya's face. He looked at the way her hand was resting on Ghost's head, the specific pressure and angle of it, the practiced, unconscious ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times in conditions that Kevin had only read about. "You're her," he said. It came out barely above a whisper. "You're his handler." Maya looked at Kevin. She took a breath. She said. "A long time ago." "That was 7 months ago," Kevin said. 7 months ago, They told me he'd been retired and his handler couldn't take him because He stopped. He looked at her leg. He looked at her face. He said, they told us you were in long-term rehabilitation. Maya said. I'm not anymore. Kevin put a hand over his mouth. He was 32 years old and had a PhD in veterinary behavioral science and had worked with 17 military dogs over 4 years and had never once done what he was very clearly on the verge of doing, which was cry at a public park bench. I've been trying to find you, he said. He's been fine, he's been doing great work, but there were adjustments. I tried to find you through the VA records, and they said you'd requested privacy. I did, Maya said. I know. I respected it. He looked at Ghost, who had not moved, who was still pressed against Maya's knee with the focused, simple certainty of a thing that has completed a mission. He didn't. The crowd had doubled in size. Sarah was still filming. She was aware that she had been filming for this entire time, and that her footage was, conservatively speaking, the most interesting footage she had gathered in 3 years of journalism, and she was aware of a second, quieter thought beneath that one, which was, who is this woman? Danny said, whatever, this is boring, with the specific energy of a man who is not bored but needs everyone to believe he is. Freak show. Come on. He reached for Maya's backpack again. He got his fingers around the strap. Ghost came off the bench like a switch had been thrown. He did not bite. He did not bark. He was simply, suddenly, between Danny's hand and the backpack, his entire body a physical argument. 80 pounds of disciplined, precisely aimed no. Danny yanked his hand back. Ghost, Maya said. Her voice was very calm. Stand down. I have it. Ghost looked at her. He looked at Danny. He returned to his position at her side. Though his posture had shifted fractionally, the difference between a soldier at ease and a soldier at ease who is keeping one eye on the room. You shouldn't have done that, Maya said to Danny. It was the first time she'd addressed him directly. Something in her tone made 3 people in the crowd independently step back without knowing why. Danny did the thing that insecure people do when they're scared, which is to become louder. Or what, he said. You gonna sick your dog on me? I'll call animal control. I'll have that animal put down. Maya stood up. The way she stood. Sarah would come back to this detail again and again in the weeks after, trying to explain it to people who hadn't been there. She'd watched hundreds of people stand up from benches in her life, and there was nothing notable about the mechanics of it. It was just one of those things bodies did automatically and without meaning. But the way Maya Chin stood up from that bench was deliberate. Every part of it was a choice. The weight transfer, left foot slightly back, bearing only 20%, right foot anchoring, was the practiced adjustment of someone who had spent years renegotiating their relationship with their own body and had made peace with it on unequal terms. She rose without rushing. She did not brace on the bench arm. She simply stood, and when she was upright, she was 5 feet 4 inches of absolute, architectural stillness. She was also, Sarah realized with a sudden recalibration of everything she'd assumed for the past hour, not afraid. Not trying not to be afraid. Not afraid. The difference, Sarah had found in years of being around people in high-stakes situations, was unmistakable and impossible to fake. Danny was still talking. He was talking about the dog, and the police, and how he knew people, and how she didn't know who she was messing with, the standard libretto of men who are performing confidence they do not have. Marcus was nodding. Tyler had taken 3 steps back, and was now essentially standing behind a parked car. Maya let him talk. She was watching him the way you watch a clock, not with attention, exactly, but with peripheral awareness, waiting for a specific moment. She found it when Danny stepped forward. What happened next, Sarah's footage recorded in full, and would be watched over 40 million times in the following week, and would be analyzed by 3 former special operations personnel in online forums who reached the same conclusion through different terminology, which was, this person has done this before, in situations where getting it wrong was not an option. Danny reached for her again, not the bag this time, her arm, and Maya moved. The first thing she did was give him his momentum. This was the part that confused people watching the video for the first time, because it looked, for about half a second, like nothing, like she had simply stepped slightly to his right and let him go past her, which is not what happened at all. What happened was that she redirected approximately 180 pounds of forward motion with about 4 ounces of lateral pressure on his wrist, and Danny Kowalski was on his knees on the pavement before any of the watching crowd had blinked. 3 seconds. Marcus, who had made the panicked decision to get involved, discovered that the human elbow does not naturally accommodate the angle that his had suddenly been introduced to, and he made a high, involuntary sound and stopped moving entirely. 5 seconds. Tyler ran. He made it 4 steps. 4th step puts you in the camera blind spot near the mailbox, Maya said. Her voice was completely level. She had not raised it. She was still managing Marcus's arm with one hand while her right foot was positioned precisely at Danny's wrist. But your phone's GPS is active, and you just uploaded a video from your account 17 minutes ago, so we know you were here. A pause. Sit down, Tyler. Tyler sat down on the sidewalk. 11 seconds, total. The crowd was silent in the way crowds are silent when they have just witnessed something that will take several minutes to process. Ghost sat at Maya's left heel, upright and still, his expression one of a thing that has never had any doubt about how this was going to go. I'm going to let go of your arm now, Maya said to Marcus, very reasonably. And you're going to sit next to Tyler. And we're going to wait for Officer Dawson to come back around the block, which he will do in approximately 4 minutes, because I watched his patrol pattern for the last 20 minutes, and he runs a 7-minute loop. She looked at Danny on the pavement. Are we in agreement? Danny said something that was not a word. Good, Maya said. She released Marcus. She stepped back. She picked up her book from the bench, The Art of War, which she had dog-eared at chapter 3, and she sat back down. She found her page. She resumed reading. Sarah filed no story about the dry cleaner that evening. She filed nothing at all that evening, because she spent 6 straight hours at her kitchen table with her laptop open and 4 browser windows running and a cold cup of coffee that she kept forgetting to drink, going down a rabbit hole that kept getting deeper the further she went. Ghost's ear. That had been the first thing. She'd gotten close enough, at one point during the police response, to see the faint tattoo on the inside of Ghost's right ear, a number and letter combination, the standard military working dog identification marking used by the United States Department of Defense. She'd photographed it without really knowing why. Kevin Park had given her his card. She'd called him at 9 that evening, and he'd answered on the first ring, with the energy of a man who had been hoping someone would call and ask him exactly this question. Ghost's full designation is MWDK 490, Kevin said. His service record is partially public through FOIA requests. He was assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group out of Fort Bragg. Handler listed as Staff Sergeant M. Chun. Can you tell me anything about the handler? A pause. Not much is in the public record, by her choice. But the dog's service record lists the missions they were assigned to jointly, and those missions have their own public summaries. Another pause. You should look up Operation Ridgeline Actual. Sarah looked it up. The public summary was 3 paragraphs, bureaucratic and abbreviated, but even through the carefully neutral language, the shape of what had happened was legible. An extraction operation in Kandahar province, a compromised position, a 12-hour delay in air support. 8 personnel extracted safely. 1 member of the handler unit sustained significant lower limb trauma during rearguard action and was subsequently medevaced. The rearguard action had lasted 47 minutes. Sarah stared at the screen. She typed M. Chun 3rd SFG K9 medals into a public records aggregator that a colleague had shown her for exactly this kind of search, and she got 2 results. A Bronze Star citation from 2019 and another from 2021, and a Purple Heart citation that had no date. Then she found the other 2 Purple Hearts buried in a supplementary awards database. 3 Purple Hearts. 1 for an IED incident in 2018. 1 for a sniper engagement in 2020. 1 for Ridgeline Actual. Sarah sat back in her chair. She thought about the woman on the bench, reading The Art of War, waiting for a 12-year-old kid to show up for a math tutorial. She thought about Officer Dawson telling her to find somewhere else to sit. She thought about Danny Kowalski's face in the 11 seconds that followed. She opened a new browser tab and typed, "How do I contact Colonel James Hartley, Pentagon?" The video went online at 11 p.m. Tuesday, posted by 3 different bystanders within the same 40-minute window. By 8 a.m. Wednesday, the combined view count across platforms had cleared 9 million. By noon, it had cleared 25 million, driven primarily by a 90-second clip that a former Marine had posted with the caption, "For everyone asking, yes, what you're watching is a specific defensive control technique taught in Special Operations Combatives." The woman in this video has been trained at a level most people in this comment section will never understand. Please update your assumptions accordingly. The original footage showed everything. Danny's approach, Ghost's arrival, the 11 seconds, Tyler sitting down at the sound of her voice. But what made the video spread fastest was not any of these moments. It was a 3-second clip near the end, after the police had arrived, Dawson back on the scene, now with 2 additional units called by panicked witnesses, in which someone with a phone had gotten close enough to capture Maya, sitting calmly on the bench with Ghost at her feet and her book open on her knee, while 2 officers processed Danny and Marcus 10 feet away, and the expression on her face was one of such complete, unhurried, self-possessed disinterest that it had become, by Wednesday afternoon, a meme template with over 200,000 uses. Sarah's article went up at 10 a.m. Wednesday, titled, "The Woman on the Bench. Who is Maya Chun, and why were the police asking her for ID?" It was, to Sarah's considered professional judgment, the best piece she had ever written, and it was also, she acknowledged privately, significantly aided by the fact that the subject matter was doing about 90% of the narrative lifting. The article detailed Ghost's service record. It detailed Operation Ridgeline Actual. It described the 3 purple hearts and the 2 bronze stars and the 11-second sequence on a park bench that tied them all together. It included a statement from Kevin Park, who said, "Ghost is one of the most behaviorally stable military working dogs I have ever worked with. He has never, in 4 years, broken protocol." When an animal with that training record makes a choice like he made on Tuesday, you should ask yourself what he knows that you don't. And it included a statement from Colonel James Hartley, which Sarah had obtained at 7 a.m. through a Pentagon media contact who had picked up the phone at 6:45 and said, upon hearing the name, "Oh, her. Yes, I'll wake him up." Hartley's statement was 12 sentences long. The relevant sentences were, "Staff Sergeant Chun served with a distinction that I have, in 31 years of military service, encountered on fewer occasions than I have fingers. Her choice to live a private life following her service is one I respect absolutely. I would ask that the people who saw her on that bench on Tuesday and formed opinions about who she was and what she was worth, sit for a moment with the information now available to them." The last sentence was, "Ghost always had better judgment than most people I know." Danny's mother arrived at Riverside Commons at 2 p.m. Wednesday. Linda Kowalski was 48 and had spent 24 years making excuses for her son in a sequence of escalating creativity, and she arrived with the energy of a woman who had seen the video and constructed, in the hours since, an alternative reading of it that placed her son in the role of victim. She arrived, unfortunately for her, at exactly the moment that a local news van was parked at the corner, and a reporter Sarah knew was doing a live walkthrough of Tuesday's scene, and a small crowd had gathered to watch the coverage. "That woman assaulted my son," Linda announced, loudly, to the general vicinity. "She assaulted him with a trained attack dog, and she should be." "Ma'am." The news reporter turned toward her with the instinctive calibration of someone who can smell a story approaching under its own steam. "Are you related to one of the individuals involved on Tuesday? My son was attacked by a homeless woman with a vicious—" The woman in the video has been identified as a decorated Army veteran with 3 Purple Heart medals, the reporter said. "Not unkindly, but not gently, either. She was there waiting to tutor a neighborhood child in mathematics. The dog is a registered therapy animal from the adjacent VA rehabilitation facility who recognized her as his former military handler." The silence that followed was of a specific quality that Sarah, watching from across the street, recognized as the silence of a narrative collapsing. Linda opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Someone in the gathering crowd held up their phone, showing Linda the Hartley statement. Someone else held up a printed copy of Sarah's article with the operation summary highlighted. Linda looked at the article. She looked at the phone. She looked at the news camera. "I want to speak to a lawyer," she said. "That's absolutely your right," the reporter said. "But your son's arraignment is at 4 o'clock, so you might want to." Linda turned and walked away. Officer Pete Dawson was placed on administrative review by Wednesday evening, after footage of his "maybe find somewhere else to sit" comment had been contextualized alongside his failure to ask Danny for identification. The police department's statement said the review was routine and procedural. Nobody in the comment sections of 300,000 posts believed this, but the comment sections, for once, were not entirely wrong. Dawson called a number he'd been given by his union rep on Wednesday night. He asked to speak to Sarah Novak. Sarah answered. I want to say something on record, Dawson said. I'm recording, Sarah said. I made a mistake on Tuesday. His voice was flat and deliberate. I made an assumption about who needed protecting based on how someone looked. That was wrong. I want that on the record. Sarah wrote it down. She wrote every word. She published it at midnight. She agreed to the interview on Thursday morning. Sarah arrived at Riverside Commons at 9, and Maya was already on the bench. Ghost was with her. Kevin had made what he described as an administrative decision to allow Ghost a few additional visits while the situation resolved itself, a decision that had been greeted by his board of directors with confused approval and by Ghost with the absolute non-reaction of an animal for whom this outcome was never in question. Sarah sat on the adjacent bench. She had her recorder out. She had 7 pages of prepared questions, and she used approximately 4 of them. Why didn't you tell anyone? Sarah asked. When the harassment started. When Dawson showed up. You could have said something. Said what? Maya asked. Not defensively. Genuinely. Who you were. Maya was quiet for a moment. She was watching a pigeon navigate a piece of bread too large for its beak. I've spent about 2 years trying to figure out what that sentence means, she said. Who you were. As if the medals are the answer to the question. As if what I did in Afghanistan is the relevant fact about me. For that situation, it shouldn't matter, Maya said. That's the whole point. She was a person. The woman Danny was harassing. Whatever anyone thought she was, whoever they thought she was a person, and that should have been enough. The fact that it wasn't, the fact that the story only changes when you add the medals, that's the problem, not the solution. Sarah wrote that down. Then why did you stay? Sarah asked. You clearly knew how to handle it. You could have left. You said so yourself. 3 options. Maya looked down at Ghost. Her hand moved to his head. Option 4, she said. You said there were 3. I was being modest. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. Option 4 is, you wait. Because sometimes the thing that needs to happen isn't the fight. Sometimes it's the thing that happens after the fight. She paused. Ghost didn't solve my problem on Tuesday. He created an opportunity. Those are different. Sarah looked at her. Did you know he was nearby? A longer pause this time. The VA center is 2 blocks from here, Maya said carefully. I come to this park twice a week. Ghost's outdoor sessions run on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. She looked at her book. She looked at the pigeons. I may have known his schedule. Did you know he would? I didn't know anything, Maya said. He made his own choice. She looked at Ghost, and the same expression Sarah had seen on the video, the private, complicated flash that had lasted less than a second, moved across her face and was gone. He always did. Sarah set down her pen. She looked at this woman on this bench, in her faded jacket and her worn boots, with her purple hearts in a shoebox 2 blocks away and a 12-year-old's algebra homework in her backpack. What do you want people to take from this? Sarah asked. It was not in her prepared questions. It was the real question. Maya was quiet for what felt like a long time. Nothing, she said finally. I want them to take nothing from it, in the sense of, I don't want to be a lesson. I don't want to be an example. She turned the page of her book. I want to sit on this bench on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and help Marcus Tully pass his 8th grade math exam. That's what I want. And Ghost? Sarah asked. Maya didn't answer right away. She was looking down the path toward the park entrance, and Sarah followed her gaze and saw a 12-year-old boy coming down the path at an uneven jog, backpack bouncing, waving in their direction. Ghost made his choice, Maya said quietly, watching Marcus approach. I made mine. They're not the same choice, but they're both right. She closed The Art of War. She opened the algebra notebook. She put a red pin on the bench beside her, ready. Marcus Tully arrived at the bench and dropped onto it with the full-weight thud of a child who is not yet aware that benches have a social weight limit, and said, I figured out the triangle thing, with the breathless energy of someone who has been waiting all day to say exactly this. Show me, Maya said. And Ghost, because he was a dog and dogs do not ask permission to do what is right, put his head in Maya's lap and closed his eyes. For months after the Tuesday that changed everything that didn't deserve to stay the same, Danny Kowalski received 18 months of community service and mandatory anger management counseling. His record, which had been successfully minimized twice before through connections his mother had maintained, found those connections suddenly unavailable in the post-video landscape. He completed his service without incident and, in a development that surprised everyone including himself, found that the counseling contained information he had not had access to before and that he was not, at 24, entirely too old to use. Officer Pete Dawson completed his administrative review, was issued a formal reprimand, and enrolled in departmental bias training. He sent Maya a handwritten letter. She read it once and kept it, not because it fixed anything, but because the act of writing it had cost him something, and she respected the cost. Sarah Novak's article was shortlisted for a National Journalism Award. She was, as of the following spring, working on a longer piece about the experience of female veterans in post-service civilian life, for which she had interviewed 11 women across 6 states, and which she privately believed was the most important thing she had ever written. Kevin Park successfully petitioned the VA program's board to amend Ghost's placement assignment. The paperwork, which moved at the pace of all institutional paperwork, which is the pace of tectonic plates, eventually reached a resolution. Ghost's official file was updated with a new primary contact. Maya Chin did not go back to the Army. She did not accept any of the 3 speaking invitations that arrived in the weeks following the article. She did not post on social media, create a platform, or leverage her story into anything leverageable, to the profound frustration of several people who believed this was a waste and the profound contentment of herself. She tutored Marcus Tully through his 8th grade math final, which he passed with a B+. She tutored 2 more children that year, because word gets around in the way that useful things get around, which is quietly and through people who trust each other. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she went to the park. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Ghost came too. The bench at the south end of Riverside Commons became, in the local informal geography of the neighborhood, the kind of landmark that doesn't appear on maps, a place people knew about and pointed out to newcomers, not because anything dramatic was currently happening there, but because something true had happened there once, and true things leave a residue. Maya never noticed. She was reading. Ghost noticed everything. That was the arrangement, and it worked. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Ghost knew this. He just needed everyone else to catch up.